Awesome.
My name is Susan Vogelsang, and I am co-manager of the Akron Neighborhood Trust along with Crystal Jones. And we want to welcome you this evening. We are very pleased to see you here. Crystal Jones and I, as part of the Akron Neighborhood Trust, are working on projects to bring all citizens, neighbors, and elected officials, service providers, and the business community, basically bringing everyone in to discuss and find common ground and collectively work on issues that matter to all of us. We want to thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and day to come and listen to this information and think about how it might help inform your work in the community. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Matt Leighninger. He's the Executive Director of the Deliberative Democracy Consortium, an alliance of major organizations and leading scholars working in the field of deliberation and public engagement. The DDC represents more than 50 foundations, nonprofit organizations, and universities collaborating to support research activities and advance democratic practices. He works throughout North America and around the world. Over the last 16 years, Matt has worked with public engagement efforts in over 100 communities in 40 states and 4 Canadian provinces. Matt is Senior Associate for Everyday Democracy, which is the former study circles, and he serves on the board of edemocracy.org, the National School Public Relations Association, and the Democracy Imperative. He has also been a consultant to the National League of Cities, Neighborhood Works America, Centers for Disease Control, and the League of Women Voters. His first book, The Next Form of Democracy, How Expert Rule is Giving Way to Shared Governance, and Why Politics Will Never Be the Same, traces the recent shifts in the relationships between citizens and government, and examines how these trends are reshaping our democracy. I am very pleased to bring Matt Leighninger to our community in Akron, Ohio. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you notice that if you have a really, really long title and subtitle for your book, it's very convenient because then people don't actually have to read it. It's, I'm excited to be here. It's been fun for me over the last several months to be talking with Susan and Crystal about the community learning centers here and some of the different kind of elements of kind of civic practice which are here and which can be combined in some interesting ways. And I'm really excited about it. And so it has been fun even just today hearing more about, from more people who have been involved in this about some of the possibilities. So it's really cool. It's very flattering to be introduced as the Executive Director of the Deliberative Democracy Consortium, but the other thing that you should probably know is that in addition to being the Executive Director, I am the only staff. So I executively direct myself, give myself great performance reviews. It's very good. So basically, as Susan said, it's an alliance of nonprofit practitioner organizations, and some of their logos are up here, who do this kind of public engagement work in communities. There are different kinds of things. Some of them are operating foundations that work that way. Some of them are kind of more consultant type groups. That's one half of the kind of the consortium, and then the other half are academic researchers who have some interest in public engagement, citizenship, democracy, and kind of come to it from that angle. I worked for Everyday Democracy for a long time, and part of what I did there was to kind of get sent out to different communities to help them figure out how to do some of the nuts and bolts of this engagement work. How do we recruit people? How do we kind of get facilitators trained? How do we create discussion materials that will help people kind of talk about some of these difficult issues? So I got a good sense, I think, over a long time of kind of just the small picture of how do we do this kind of work. But I'm not sure I really had a good sense of the big picture until a few years ago when I was in Lakewood, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. And the reason I was in Lakewood was that even though on surveys, residents of Lakewood thought it was a great place to live, they thought the schools were great, they valued the public services that were provided by government, everything was wonderful, but the city budget had gone pretty deeply into the red because 9 times in the previous 30 years, residents had voted down sales tax increases intended to kind of maintain the same level of services. So the mayor had brought together a bunch of community leaders and was basically saying, what do you want us to do? Should we cut services? Should we raise taxes? Should we do something else? And so there's this kind of interesting conversation taking place. And finally somebody said, Mayor, we like you. We think you're working hard for us. But basically what we have had here is a parent-child relationship between government and citizens. And what we really need to figure out is how to create kind of an adult-adult relationship. And that for me was kind of a nice picture of what I realized I had been seeing in lots of other places as well. This kind of, generational shift in what people want out of government and out of kind of institutions in their communities. And so I began to kind of get a sense of kind of what was really driving this huge growth in engagement work that's been happening over the last 10 or 15 years or so. And I began to realize that, people in Lakewood, like people, in lots of other communities, that they have more capacity and skills that they can bring to the table, and yet they have less time to get to the table, less time to devote to their schools, to public life, to their community. That people have kind of a sense of kind of expectation from government, more kind of a sense of entitlement about government protection and services, and yet they're less confident that government and other institutions in their lives are going to actually be able to deliver. That people are in many ways less connected to what's happening in their neighborhood or their community, but when there is kind of the issue or problem or plan comes up that they really care about, they're better able to find kind of the information, the allies, the resources they need to make an impact on that question. So you might say that citizens, and by which I mean all kinds of residents, not citizens in the legal sense, but citizens are less willing to be governed and better at governing than ever before. And that they're both kind of more potentially disruptive in public, as well as being productive in all kinds of public decision making. So on the other side of this, you have, actually another part of this that I think a lot of people will recognize, especially when you're talking about schools and community learning centers, is that families with young children in many ways have the most at stake, when it comes to being engaged in their schools and their neighborhoods, and yet they have the least time to be part of that. So I was talking to a guy who was talking about engagement. He was saying, all this place-based stuff is kind of a thing of the past. The internet and everything now, it's all about kind of the bigger issues and kind of the global and kind of national kinds of things. And I couldn't figure out why he was so focused on this. And I kind of finally realized, he doesn't have kids yet. And once you have kids, whether or not you had it before, all of a sudden you have a connection to place in a different way, and all of a sudden there are these kind of smaller versions of you walking around that neighborhood or that school, and you are deathly afraid for their safety. You are committed to kind of trying to create some kind of an atmosphere, an environment for them that's going to be safe, nurturing, where they've got adult role models, where they got people kind of looking out for them, all those different kinds of things. And so, and of course I feel this way myself, having kids, that need to be, that motivation to be part of what's happening in my community, in my neighborhood, in the school is higher than ever, and yet the time I have to do any of those kind of things is smaller than ever. And that partly also, I think what motivates me and what motivates lots of other parents to be part of things is that they're not simply about kind of the political kinds of decisions or public decisions being made by schools or communities or city council or the school board, but that they're also things that are kind of community things. And that parents are going to be want to be part of things that are not simply about the decisions that are about kind of social and cultural life of their communities. And I'll give you some examples of that more, but that's another piece. When you look at kind of the way engagement works in communities, you've got a couple different kinds of things. One, you've got kind of temporary efforts to get people involved in a particular issue or decision, and those have all kinds of attributes, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. But then you also have, in lots of places, structures, often at the neighborhood level, sometimes at the school level, which are intended to be kind of there for the long haul. They're intended to be kind of arenas for people to kind of bring some of their issues and decisions and goals and kind of concerns. And so you have neighborhood councils, in some cases neighborhood associations, and all those different, some of these kinds of systems around the country. And they have some common weaknesses. They, in many cases, are kind of formed in the image of government as kind of a city council for the neighborhood or a school board for the school. And they have all of the same dysfunctions of your standard city council, and yet not the same level of kind of legitimacy or authority. In most of these kinds of things, older people, higher income people, people with higher levels of education tend to get overrepresented. In many of them, kind of meetings are kind of poorly run. They lack all the kind of good group process things that we know can work, like neutral facilitation, small group discussion, background materials, giving groups the chance to kind of set their own ground rules, those kinds of things. And then they've got some other things. In many cases, there's still no online dimension to them. And even in neighborhoods where there's kind of one of these new neighborhood level online forums, and those are kind of bubbling up all over the place, or listservs, there's often no connection between that kind of online opportunity and the face-to-face kind of neighborhood council or neighborhood associations. There's often no role for kids or teenagers or young adults. And in general, you might say that kind of there's these kinds of groups, there's kind of lots of politics, there's lots of the kind of the decision-making stuff, and not enough fun. And so therefore, you have, over time, kind of participation, which is kind of, getting smaller and smaller so that it becomes this kind of relatively small cadre of people who are not necessarily representative of the kind of the larger number of people living in the neighborhood. And so this is, partly what you see kind of leading to some of the conflicts that you have in kind of local politics, the not in backyard kinds of, my backyard kinds of arguments. You often will then have development that doesn't reflect what people want, gentrification, displacement, and in general kind of, growing mistrust between citizens and the public institutions. Some of these same kinds of weaknesses are repeated when you look at kind of schools and kind of some of the kind of recurring or permanent kind of structures for parents and other community members to be involved in how their schools function. Same kind of overrepresentation of higher income, more educated parents. Again, the recruitment is lacking. They don't know how or whether they should be kind of reaching into different kind of corners of the neighborhood or their community to kind of bring in different kinds of people. Usually no online dimension, a lack of kind of the group process stuff, a lot of the same kinds of things. And again, you have similar kinds of breakdowns when it comes to schools as you have with neighborhoods. Again, kind of conflict over some of the big decisions like school closings and school redistricting kinds of questions and school funding kinds of questions, mistrust, and also, another kind of thing when you're looking at school systems, you know that kind of parent engagement in their kids' education is kind of study after study been shown to be one of the key kind of indicators as far as student success. And when that's not happening, then of course you've got lower levels of success than you could have. So let me just stop for a second because I've already bombarded you with lots of stuff. And as you can tell, my style is to keep doing that until you ask questions or scream. So questions or comments about any of this stuff that I've kind of shown you so far? Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that you were saying about weaknesses in neighborhood groups and this and that and the other, there's been a deliberate trend over the last 35 years for government not to help support neighborhood groups. They would rather support services as opposed to support advocacy and systemic change and those kinds of things.
Right.
And that's by design. Mm-hmm. I mean, the A95 review process is out the window. Non-elected, non-appointed people have very low impact on these decisions that affect their lives. So that's by design, whether you're talking about school, right, government, or whatever. And that's just a reality because mm-hmm. the leadership, they do not want a lot of input. They want to do what they want to do.
Right. And I think part of what we're seeing is that design is breaking down. That basically all kinds of people having, because of the kind of shift in what they can do and shift in their kind of attitudes about authority and expectations and things like the internet that help them organize all that kind of stuff, that basically people don't sit back and take that anymore. And so no matter how it got set up to begin with, you kind of hear all kinds of local officials, school administrators, all kinds of local leaders kind of saying, I can't make decisions the way I used to because people won't let me.